try painting or drawing outdoors, particularly in bad weather, or in interesting weather, should we say. But you feel so much physically involved with the weather. The weather gets into your head. So it's not a technical thing anymore, it's a very physical thing, and that's brought out in the marks in the drawing. Now to some people, a drawing like this might appear to be, let's get that right, appear to be somewhat abstract. From my perspective, this is very realistic, but not like a camera. I'm not trying to make a photograph. I'd use a camera if I was trying to do that. I'm trying to convey my sense of feeling about being there in the weather. So that's what happens outdoors. But what I do in the studio, and this is what I'm going to demonstrate to you today, what I do in the studio is another thing. Because in the studio, nice and warm, no wind, no rain, no ice, very controlled conditions, everything laid out, neat and tidy. That's a very different set of conditions to respond to the weather. So in effect, I'm having to make it up. And this painting here, which is part complete, the reason I brought this with me is to show you not just some techniques and some ideas about how you might paint the sky, in particular the clouds, but also about how you might change a painting. So for me, very often, the process of painting in the studio is a business of having a go, making something happen, get something started, and then putting it away for a while, and then coming back to it, which is the stage I'm at now. Coming back to it and thinking, now how could I actually make that better, a lot better? Now, someone like Turner, of course, is a pretty hard act to follow, but these major artists who've gone down in history for very good reasons are very good role models as well. They get you thinking, which for me isn't about copying, although I have copied many different artists. It's not about copying, but it's about being inspired by what they did. There are some exceptions, so that moon and that vapour trail, they need a certain level of detail for you to understand what they are. Otherwise they would be abstract, and I'm not trying to produce an abstract painting. If I were, I would be using very different marks. So, where am I going to start with this? Some decisions. One of the things I've been thinking is that this cloud here, which has got this swirling motion to it, I don't know if you've watched cumulus clouds closely. I've been doing a lot of watching in the last couple of years and drawing them as well and photographing them. And the edges of almost every cumulus cloud that I've observed, the edges curl in on themselves. They're constantly tumbling. These clouds aren't a cardboard cutout that moves across the sky. They tumble and turn, vortexes. I want to get something of that over in the painting, so there's going to be some of that energy. The difference between there and there is so small in tone that the clouds kind of merge into each other, and I don't want that, so that's the first thing I'm going to do. So I'm going to mix up a colour. I suppose the first colour you put on your brush is the colour that says, this is more or less the kind of colour I want, a bluish colour. Because I don't want this particular colour, but I do want a bluish colour, and there's a cool colour. So I'm going to put it on the cool part of the palette there. And then I'm going to dip into the titanium white, and we see how strong that titanium is. It's a very powerful colour. So I've now got a light blue, well, mid-tone actually. It's about a mid-tone blue. Let's just have a look. See, compared to that cerulean blue in the sky, this looks quite dark. On the palette it may look a little bit lighter. That's the advantage of having a white palette, but I don't have a white palette, so I'm going to have to concentrate. Now, to turn that into a grey, anybody got any ideas about that? Do you know what the magic formula is? There is a particular combination that works pretty well. Yeah, so I've got burnt umber here on the palette. You forecast what I was going to do. So a little bit of burnt umber in there. Let's see what it makes. Well, it looks slightly greenish to me. Let's put it on the painting and see what it looks like. Interestingly, although it looks to me slightly greenish on the palette, it looks much bluer on the painting, and that's what matters at the end of the day, is what's on the painting. Having put a mark on the painting, I can then make a decision. Now, is that the right colour? Is it the right tone? Being cooler, it contrasts with these colours here, which are pinker and warmer, so that's pretty much what I want. I think I'll just make that slightly darker and slightly bluer. Working with a big brush like this encourages you to put a lot of paint on. And I think that's always a good thing. At least it's a good thing if you want to extend your confidence and your range of skills. If you haven't worked with large brushes before, it's a good thing to do. It doesn't mean to say that all paintings done with large brushes are better than paintings done with small brushes. That's rubbish. Let's just have a look at that. Okay, alright, yeah. So I'm going to modify it now. This is what I like to do. It's fun to do, but it also, in my opinion, produces stronger work. Is to work with the rag. So this rag is for removing paint and for moving the paint around. You know, it is removing quite a lot of it. What the effect of removing that paint is. Where it's very thin there, it's actually altered the colour of the paint underneath. But you can see how quickly you can get marks, the kind of marks you might be interested in, these energetic swirling marks in my case. And if you put a bit of turpentine on there, you can not only remove most of it, but you can really start to change it. It means that you're interacting with other colours, and that's a very interesting thing to do, to have an underpainting, if you like. Some underpaintings are like this, more or less a single colour, a dominant colour at any rate, and other underpaintings can be much more complex. There's no particular rule. So if you haven't worked with underpainting before, and if you're a watercolourist you won't have done, that's highly unlikely, but if you haven't worked with underpainting, it's a very interesting thing to do. Maybe to work with colours that are not the colours you're aiming for, so you're working against those colours. In this case, I'm working with colours that are sympathetic, in as I am trying to produce similar colours to what's underneath. The paint itself won't be dry. Now I'm going to just introduce a slight bit of warmth into this colour. So adding red to that makes it slightly purplish, and adding a touch of yellow, this is cadmium yellow, makes it slightly brownish. Yellow, red and blue make brown generally. It may occasionally make something closer to grey, but mixing browns is a mixture of those three primary colours. Okay. Now, one of the things about having painting underneath is that there are brush marks, and any brush mark that you put on, particularly with a large brush, and particularly if you're not pressing too hard, will pick up the texture of those marks. It's another interesting thing about layering that I find interesting at any rate, that there are textures that you maybe can't even see, and they're there in the painting. These texture marks are quite horizontal. Okay. Now, I'm going to add a touch of white to this. What I try to do is to mix the darker colours down here and the lighter colours up here. So I'm just going to make a lighter version of that. Can you see that all right? Okay. So I can see the difference. That's the other thing about organising the palette. You have similar colours next to each other, and then you can compare them and say, okay, maybe add a bit more white here, or add a bit more yellow, or whatever it is. Still using the same brush. I'll often end up at the end of a painting session with 20, 25 brushes like this, for different colours. Otherwise I'd have to be cleaning the brush all the time, which is not good. If you're in a hurry, if you've only got a limited amount of time, you haven't got time to clean up, all you have to do is wrap that in cling film, provided you wrap it properly, keep the air off, it'll keep from going dry for 3 or 4 days. Be careful though, because I've managed to damage very expensive brushes by forgetting. Right, cloth. How are we doing for time? What I often end up doing is removing at least half of what I've put on. It's a process of putting on and taking off, and that creates a complex set of marks. This palette's actually quite heavy because there's so much dried paint on it. It's always wanting to tilt over.
What blue?
This is ultramarine, this particular one, which makes a good mix with burnt umber, makes a good grey. That's cobalt, which will make a slightly greenish grey. Cobalt is more opaque, so it can be useful, especially if you're trying to paint over something. And especially if you mix it with titanium white, which is very opaque. So ultramarine is pretty transparent. And if you thin it down with turpentine or oil, it's even more transparent. It's a very good glazing colour. Burnt umber is also quite transparent. So the mixture of those two is still transparent. I've added white, titanium white, and that has turned it opaque. If I put it on neat like that, it is obliterating what's underneath, but it doesn't take much to reveal what's underneath again. Okay. And it's just a slightly warmer colour underneath. Now I'm going to stand back because one of the things that is difficult to judge, especially if you're working on a large piece of work, is what does it actually look like in totality? What's the wholeness of this? And given that I'm working with the whole of this world, you get focused on one bit and you don't realise the effect it's having on the rest of the picture. You've got to stand back. Very useful having a camera. I might do this in my studio. Just kind of seeing an opportunity here, maybe to create something like that. I'm going to work on this area. Now this bit of cloud here is just peeking out behind that one, and that one's behind that. So there's a sense here that somewhere in amongst all this water vapour, light's getting through. It's either getting through directly, or it's getting through by being filtered. So I'm going to mix up some stronger, paler colour. Usually what I do is lay out the colours on the table in the order of the spectrum, and it's just quick. You can get to the colour you want without searching. It's of some clouds. In fact, it's of some cumulus clouds. And one of the things I do remember, and you can see it in the painting, is that the thickness of the paint was like no other paint I'd ever used. That viscosity and thickness. I'm going to subdue it slightly with a little bit of cobalt blue. Has just knocked it down a touch. Just taken some of the edge off it. It's just now. Great thing about palette knives is they clean off very easily. So you have a cloth just for cleaning stuff. There it is, it's ready to go. Comparing that colour with this is distinctly more yellow than that. We've got some orange up here as well. And there's a little bit of orange down here. So I'm thinking about, does that work? Or is that just an isolated colour? I'm going to just tone it down slightly. What will happen because of the turpentine is that as that dries, it will go slightly duller, just slightly, over a period of a day or two. I'm going to work with that colour, but up here now. How do you create a dark orange that isn't too bright? One way is to add blue. I'm just adding this cobalt blue. And you can see the greening effect that has on it, but when I get that on the painting, well, I don't think it'll look quite so green, that's right. That's quite strong. So you mix something, you put it on, you assess it in the moment, and decide whether you want to modify that. So I'm adding a little bit of turpentine each time, because if I don't, I will end up with areas of paint that are shiny. Just making sure that I do that. Okay. Add a bit more blue, and then a touch of red. So what I do is I go into the side of the blob of paint. So I don't just stick my brush straight in the paint because that contaminates the paint, so just stick it in the side. And then that rest of that blob of paint is clean. Now there's a vapour trail here, and I'm trying to create a contrast between the cloud, this yellowish sunlit cloud, and the vapour trail, which is much higher up. And if you study vapour trails, they vary a lot in different kinds of light. They're often greyish colour. So I'm mixing together just a little bit of blue there, tiny touch of red, a bit too much there, touch more blue. This is cobalt blue, which is a mid-blue. Ultramarine is a purpley blue, cobalt's a mid-blue, cerulean is a more greenish blue, and phthalocyanine is just something else. And then of course you've got Prussian blue, which is wonderful, but not appropriate to this piece of work. Let's see what that looks like. Oh no, it's too pink, and too dark. Just add a bit of white, and that's going to make it very opaque, so I'm going to add a bit of turpentine to thin it down. Well, let's just get it stuck in there. And this is the wonderful thing about working with slow drying paints and rags. You know, I've made a complete mess there. And now I can unmess it. Let's get a clean rag. So I'm just going to soften that edge to a more neutral colour, and then I'm going to slap it in here. And this is scumbling it over the surface. So scumbling is that idea of producing a more textural effect, but not necessarily with very thick paint. Provided the surface underneath has got some texture in it, it'll pick that off the brush. You get an apparent texture. It's another aspect of paintings getting interesting when they're built up in layers that certain effects happen. So I'm just don't want it too bright. It's that sense of light coming through the cloud rather than being reflected off the surface. And then I'm going to add just a touch of that pink. So that's going to dull it down. So it's still essentially cobalt. It's a light cobalt, but it's been dulled down a touch. And let's see. What's that like? So one of the things I'm very aware of as clouds melt away and the edges tumble over themselves is how the water vapour in the cloud is actually becoming that invisible blue. It's actually still full of water vapour, you know. And that's the sense I want to get over here. But it's also, from a pictorial point of view, it's part of the pattern making. You know, it's the visual interest, isn't it? The detail painting there, just at the end. Not sure that works, but we'll